this is going to be a tutorial, fairly quick one I think, on how to cross stitch, and mainly focusing on how to cross stitch on higher counts of fabric. So I'm starting off with a very basic example here. So I've used a squash or a tennis racket. I don't know the difference, but I'm using a tennis racket. And I want you to imagine that this darning needle is a cross stitch needle and that the yarn is embroidery floss. I've already started and I have 2 stitches put in. And in this kind of, why I'm using this particular analogy is because in the higher, so if you're using a 14 count, which I have here, a 14 count cloth, see, it's divided up into lots and lots of squares. Every even weave cloth is divided into squares, but with the higher counts, with the 14 count, you just go from, use the needle as an example, you go from this hole over to this hole and this hole to this hole. It's fairly easy to understand. But when you're getting into higher count fabrics, which are considered over 2, if you're stitching over 2 threads, you're actually looking at a square that's comprised of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then back up to 1, 2, 3. So this is considered stitching over 2 fabric threads. Okay, so you're going to come up in the corner. Now with cross stitch, this is, I'm not going to concentrate on, this is more of a tutorial on not so much how to cross stitch from the start, but how to cross stitch on higher count fabric. So I will do another tutorial with how to cross stitch from a beginner and start you off for these stitches here. But please keep in mind that with cross stitch, you keep the legs of your stitches going the same way. So see how the right leg is under the left leg, right leg is under the left leg. And in this instance, I'll be doing the right leg under the left leg as well. Okay, sorry this is jiggling. This is not the perfect setup, but it's as good as I could get this afternoon. So see how I have gone, I've done the full square with the left leg over the right leg coming up and down, but I'm using 3 blocks. So I'm going to show you another example on this, show you what I mean on this whiteboard. So you've got your 4 holes that are comprised of your blocks. Or in what I was just doing, you also have a hole in the middle. Okay? So for the purpose of what I was just doing on, that would be say a 28 count fabric, you ignore your hole in the middle and you're going to stitch, I stitch, because there's no real rules in cross stitch other than having your legs all in the same direction. I stitch my left leg first, then I come up on the top left and stitch with this coming over. So I don't know, so I keep my left to right underneath, my right to left on top. Now, where's my... Okay, so when you're using a fabric that's of a higher count and it has lots and lots of dots, and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I do, say, a half stitch, a 3/4 stitch, a 10th stitch? How do I do those stitches when you have all these holes to deal with? So in between all these holes, if you look carefully at your fabric, you're going to notice that there's either 2 strands of thread in between, or there's going to be 4 in between. Oops, try and fit in a 4th. Not very well drawn, Patty, sorry about that. And so what you're going to do with your needle, if you're doing so you want to fill in this stitch here, this is considered a 3/4 stitch. You're going to come up through in the middle of these 2 stitches and in the middle of these 2 threads of your fabric thread and these 2 threads of your fabric thread here in the middle. You're going to come up there and then go down. I find it easier to come up. Actually, that's not true. Come up from this corner. I find it easier to go down in the middle because a cross stitch needle is not as pointy as a regular sewing needle. It's a blunter tip, so it's easier for me to come up over here, go down here in the middle, then come up like I normally do through here and come across there. Okay, so I'm going to do that one more time so it's a little bit less confusing. And then I'll show you on some waste canvas. Actually, I'll show you back on my racket again. So imagine that there's 4 threads here now in between all of these holes. You come up, and I'm going to do a 3/4 stitch. You come up here in this corner. You go pick the middle, so you kind of got to wiggle your needle in between here. Put that down here, then come up on this side and come down. So then if you're doing a 1/2 stitch or a 10th stitch, you just go from here to here. That's a 10th stitch, here to here to the next dot. And then so those are your fractional stitches, okay? These are halves or 10th stitches. This is your 3/4 stitch. Sometimes it may call for just one, and if that's the case, use another 4 thread example. You're just going to come up here, wiggle, go to the middle of all these threads, so 2 in between and 2 in between here, and then go down in the middle there. Okay, so let's try that on the racket, and then I'll move over to waste thread. I hope this is working and it's not too confusing. So back here to our racket. Again, you can see I've got to pick up my needle, which has, oops, sorry, gone right down on the floor. Let's do so I'm going to do a 10th stitch. I'm going to do it over here a little bit further away. So I'm coming up in the bottom left. So this is a 10th stitch or 1/2 stitch. Coming down on the top right. And then you're done. Okay? But if you're going to do a 3/4 stitch, which is another fractional stitch, you're going to come up over to the side, and then you're going to use that middle here. It's very wide, of course, here on this racket, but normally you would have to wiggle your needle a little bit in between the threads. Bring that down. So I'm making a 3/4 stitch here. Then you finish, so you've got from here to here, come up on the top left, and then you would come over. I've got the stitch in the way here, but you come over in the bottom right to complete that stitch. Okay, so there, that makes, if you look at just that part, really nice tail and a cross there for a 3/4 fractional stitch. Okay, now we're going to move to something else. All right, now I'm going to show you on a piece of waste fabric. This is 8.5 count, which I thought would be useful for showing you how to do stitch over 2 threads again. I'm still using a darning needle, so a fairly big needle, and I'm using the full 6 strands of embroidery floss. I have 1 cross stitch completed so that I can use so I could anchor my thread. So I'm just going to do a regular cross stitch. I'm going to come up in the top left. I'm going to ignore the hole in the middle. Come down in the top right. Come over to the top left. And then go down on the top right. Okay, now I'm going to do a 3/4 stitch. Okay, so I'm going to start my 3/4 stitch down here. So this is similar to where I had showed you on the whiteboard, where you come up in the bottom left and then you wiggle in between. See how the camera will focus. I'm wiggling in between those 2 threads, pushing it through, and then I'm coming up. So often if you see, or what I have seen in patterns, is that you'll see one color like this, and then a different color to the side of this one, so coming up here to the middle and then to the side. So then if I had a different color, if I was looking at the pattern and it had a half of the square was this, it was one color, the other half was this color, I would then finish my stitches, come back to this, come up in this side, come down in the middle, and then do the same. And then what I usually do is put my fingernail in between these two as I'm pulling down that one so that they lay flat and nice and neat next to each other. Okay, so I'm going to pretend that this is a different color. I would come up, so with my different colored thread, come down in the middle again. Then I would come up where I normally do there, use my finger to pull the other color over a bit, come down there, and there you have it nice, laying nice and neat next to each other. So that's how you would complete 2 fractional stitches in a square that's been split in half with, this would be, say this is black and this is orange over here. So now I'm going to move on to 14 count. Brief interruption there. The mailman just came to deliver a parcel. I'm back. You didn't notice I was gone, did you? So I'm working now on 14 count fabric. This is a beautiful, this is actually a piece of fabric that you use for a breadcloth that is old as the hills, but really nice soft 14 count fabric. So I'm using an embroidery needle, or sorry, a cross stitch needle. This is a 26 or a 28. I'll note that on the bottom. It's the same needle I use for just about everything. So that's my needle of choice. I know it's a Bohin, B-O-H-I-N, but I can't remember if it's a 26 or a 28. I only remember when I go to order them from Traditional Stitches, then I have to look up what size it is. So you can see here, I've got 1 cross stitch completed. Oh, and there's 3 strands of embroidery floss on here, so it's nice and thick. Now, hopefully you can see this, although I know it's hard. There are, see the threads that are going down? Let me see if I can pull those out a little bit. See, there's 2 threads going up and down there, and underneath there's the same. And let me see if it's just 2 threads. I gotta look with the disadvantage of older eyes. Underneath, it's actually 4 strands. So 2 strands on top. Put that back so it'll focus for you. 2 strands on top and 4 on the bottom. So what you're going to do for a fractional stitch is exactly the same as I've already showed you. You're going to wiggle your needle so that it goes in between. There's always an even number of threads, so it's going to go in between those threads. So this is your 3/4 stitch again, or some people call it half stitch, but it's more of a 3/4 stitch. Okay, let me pull this down. Sorry, it's a bit awkward to do on camera. Okay, there we go. And down. And that's going to give you a beautiful 3/4 stitch. See that? So I hope this tutorial helped. If you have any more questions, please let me know and I'll be more than happy to answer, and I can even retape a section or sections in a different way if you think it'll help. So happy stitching, and I will chat with you soon. Bye!